Something steps out of the tree line. Too tall, too still, too deliberate. The camera captures only seconds before it disappears. Not running, not startled, just gone. In another forest, a massive figure crosses into view without hesitation, as if it knows no one will get close enough to prove what it is. These weren't planned investigations. They were accidental recordings. Tonight, we're counting down 6 of the scariest Bigfoot encounters ever caught on camera. Brief, unfiltered moments that left witnesses shaken and still searching for answers, because whatever was out there didn't seem afraid of being seen. A dark, unexplained figure emerged against the blinding white snow covering the slopes of Francis Peak in Utah. Seen from miles away in Farmington, the distant silhouette appeared to move across the steep mountainside with a speed and confidence that immediately caught the witnesses' attention. Stunned by what they were seeing, they quickly zoomed their camera in as far as possible, hoping to capture whatever was crossing the mountain. As the footage continued, the figure steadily traversed a vast stretch of snow-covered terrain. Conditions on the mountain were extreme, with nearly 90 inches of snow blanketing the peak at an elevation of more than 9,500 feet. An average hiker would be expected to struggle through snow that deep, yet the mysterious subject never appeared to slow down. It maintained a steady, deliberate pace that seemed completely at odds with the unforgiving landscape. Later, Rocky Mountain Sasquatch compared the footage to a video recorded the previous day showing a man hiking much lower on the mountain. The comparison only emphasized how isolated and unusually large the distant figure appeared against the massive mountainside. The longer the witnesses watched, the stranger the encounter became. Even as they struggled to keep the distant subject in frame, the stabilized footage captured it, moving with remarkable confidence across the steep slope. There was no sign of hesitation or uncertainty. It navigated the rugged terrain with a level of ease that seemed difficult to reconcile with the harsh conditions. From the observer's position in the valley, the figure was nearly a mile higher in elevation, making its effortless movement even more difficult to explain. As the zoomed-in footage flickered, the silhouette continued its steady climb without any obvious change in pace. Whether it was an unknown animal, a person, or something else entirely, the recording preserves one of the more unusual sightings ever captured on the slopes of the Wasatch Range. When researchers later examined the footage, one detail drew the most attention: the subject's gait. Large animals native to the Wasatch, including elk, moose, and even black bears, typically struggle through snowpack that deep, sinking heavily and expending enormous energy with every step. The figure in the video, however, appeared to move with a smooth, upright stride that rarely broke its rhythm. Analysts associated with Rocky Mountain Sasquatch also noted that the subject's center of gravity remained surprisingly consistent from frame to frame, a characteristic they believed was more consistent with practiced bipedal movement than an animal briefly standing on 2 legs. No wildlife agency has officially commented on the footage, and the witnesses never got close enough to determine what they had actually seen. In the end, all they were left with was the recording itself, a mystery that continues to spark debate years later. So what do you think was making its way across the frozen slopes of Francis Peak that day? A dark, hulking figure stood motionless against the rugged, steep hillside, instantly drawing the attention of a driver passing through the Blue Mountains of Oregon. The witness, Kelly, had been scanning the terrain while traveling along a remote road near a closed campground when a black silhouette caught her eye. It didn't look like a hiker or any animal she recognized. Against the rocky slope, it simply looked out of place. Sensing that something wasn't right, she quickly pulled out her iPhone 15 to record the figure before it disappeared into the brush. As the camera zoomed in, the figure never moved. It remained perfectly still, almost as if it were aware of the vehicle idling on the road below. Kelly, accompanied by her 9-year-old daughter, struggled to process what they were seeing. To the young girl, the figure didn't even register as a person, prompting her to ask a simple but unsettling question: "What is that?" Through the smartphone lens, the figure appeared massive, with unusually long, dark arms that seemed to hang toward its rear. What had started as a peaceful drive quickly gave way to an uneasy silence, leaving Kelly with the overwhelming feeling that they were being watched. Its broad shoulders and strange, unsteady posture were unlike anything she had encountered in years of exploring the wilderness. Kelly later shared the encounter with the team at Rocky Mountain Sasquatch, but the mystery only deepened. After watching the figure for several minutes, she parked the car to get a better look. But when she turned back toward the hillside, it was gone. The steep rock formations and dense brush would have made it extremely difficult for anything that large to move away so quickly without making a sound or leaving some sign of its presence. The sighting occurred roughly 25 miles from where Paul Freeman once documented his own evidence of an elusive creature. Kelly noted that the area was completely devoid of other people or vehicles, ruling out the possibility of another camper or hiker. The unsettling feeling of being watched, followed by the figure's near-instant disappearance, was enough to leave both mother and daughter deeply shaken and eager to leave the area. Whether this was a juvenile Sasquatch or something else entirely, the encounter left a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. The footage captures a brief and haunting moment in the remote wilderness, where a mysterious figure remained visible just long enough to be recorded before slipping back into the shadows of the mountains. Was this really Bigfoot? Or did Kelly and her daughter witness something else hidden deep within the Umatilla National Forest? That wasn't the only trail camera to capture something science couldn't explain. On March 2nd, 2015, a trail camera belonging to the Alberta Conservation Association was triggered deep in the Alberta wilderness. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The only sound was grass rustling, slow, rhythmic, as though something heavy was moving just beyond the camera's view. Then, it stepped into frame. A massive, fur-covered figure crossed directly in front of the lens, filling nearly the entire image before disappearing just seconds later. The encounter lasted less than 3 seconds, but the figure appeared noticeably broader and taller than any bear wildlife biologists in the region would typically expect to see. But the encounter wasn't over. Moments later, the trail camera captured a deep, guttural vocalization, something between a growl and a roar, low enough to be felt as much as heard. The Alberta Conservation Association didn't simply dismiss the footage. Field biologists returned to the exact location, where they discovered fresh tracks preserved in the snow, along with hair samples caught on nearby brush. They carefully photographed, measured, and documented everything before the evidence could be disturbed or the snow began to melt. The samples were then submitted for genetic testing, following the association's standard procedure for unexplained wildlife encounters. The results only deepened the mystery. Dr. Todd Zimmerling, president and CEO of the Alberta Conservation Association, later confirmed that the genetic analysis failed to match any known species on record, not a grizzly bear, not a black bear, and not any other animal native to the region. For an organization dedicated to documenting wildlife with scientific precision, that wasn't a conclusion reached lightly. This wasn't a blurry photo shared online or a decades-old campfire story. It was footage investigated by trained field biologists, backed by physical evidence and laboratory testing that ultimately produced no clear explanation. Years later, the clip continues to circulate because so little about it has been disproven. Just 3 seconds of footage, a single unexplained vocalization, tracks and hair samples that have never been conclusively identified. No confirmed hoax has ever emerged, and no official retraction has ever been issued. What continues to draw investigators back isn't just the video, it's the evidence that followed. Wildlife biologists routinely document bear activity throughout Alberta's conservation lands, yet the size estimates recorded at the site didn't match any animal on the province's active tracking records. The tracks measured well beyond the range typically documented for local bears, while the distance between the prints suggested a stride unlike that of a 4-legged animal moving at a similar pace. The recovered hair samples were processed using the same chain of custody procedures applied to any disputed wildlife case, making the inconclusive DNA results even more difficult to dismiss. Rather than becoming another forgotten internet clip, the incident remains an unresolved case tied to an agency whose job is to know exactly what inhabits those forests. So what do you think crossed in front of that Alberta trail camera? A massive, human-like footprint lay pressed into the snow along a four-wheeler trail, marking the beginning of an encounter the witness would never forget.
On the four-wheeler trail, I see quite a large human-looking footprint. So I'm looking at that footprint, and I just see one footprint, and I'm looking around, someone playing a joke or prank or something. What in the world is a pretty good-sized human footprint in the snow here?
An experienced bow hunter who had spent more than a decade exploring these woods initially dismissed it as a prank, or perhaps some strange coincidence. But that explanation quickly fell apart when he spotted a second footprint from the opposite foot, just a few yards away on the bank. Curiosity soon outweighed caution. As he followed the trail deeper into the woods, his search came to an abrupt stop when a heavy, deliberate grunt echoed from a nearby thicket.
And I could see that the strides have shortened quite a bit. They're not near as long as they were when I first found them. They're only about a stride and a half of mine now in between the footprints. So I'm coming up on this little thicket, and I get within about 30 to 40 yards of this little thicket, and I hear a pretty heavy grunt.
Moving to within roughly 25 yards, he noticed the upper body of a figure shifting through the brush while the lower half remained strangely motionless. The air suddenly felt heavy with tension as he realized he had wandered far too close to whatever was making the noise. He slowly shifted to his left for a better view and froze. Standing just 15 feet inside the tree line was a hair-covered figure, roughly 5.5 feet tall, staring directly back at him. The fear hit so suddenly and intensely that it nearly made him physically ill. Then the situation became even more terrifying.
So I swung around to the left to look, and looking dead at me at about 30 yards is about a 5.5 foot tall, hairy man. He's about maybe 15 feet into the tree, black fur, long hair on him. And it made me, I was so scared that I came close to vomiting.
The larger shape he had initially mistaken for a bear suddenly rose from the thicket, towering over the smaller figure. Moments later, the smaller creature let out a sharp grunt. Believing he was in immediate danger, the hunter instinctively raised his rifle and fired a shot into the chest of the larger figure. What happened next was unlike anything he believed possible. As he turned to run, he glanced back and saw the wounded creature being lifted off the ground by an even larger companion. Displaying what he described as extraordinary strength, the massive figure reached up with one hand, gripped the face of a steep rock cliff, and pulled both of them up the near-vertical incline before disappearing from sight. The account later surfaced as part of a documentary featuring reports of unexplained encounters. For the hunter, it transformed what should have been an ordinary day in familiar woods into an experience he could never explain. Seeing a creature scale a cliff that seemed nearly impossible to climb left him questioning everything he thought he knew about the wilderness. Investigators also found his background difficult to ignore. He had spent years hunting and guiding through those same forests and was well acquainted with the sounds and behavior of local wildlife. He maintained that nothing he heard or saw that day resembled an elk, a bear, or any other animal he had encountered in more than a decade on that mountain. He also insisted that firing his rifle was a last resort, after backing away twice as the smaller figure continued closing the distance. Yet what stayed with him the longest wasn't the shot. It was watching the larger creature climb a cliff that had taken him and his hunting partners nearly an hour to scale with ropes earlier that same season. So what do you think the hunter encountered that day? The terror began with reports of a large, furry creature moving through the Florida woods, an unsettling mystery that slowly gained attention as more residents came forward with similar sightings. But for one man, the mystery would soon become terrifyingly personal. The tent suddenly buckled inward, pressing 6 to 8 inches into his face, As he woke in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, it wasn't the wind.
And when I open my eyes, the tent is 6, maybe 8 inches from my face, and then it pops back up. It's one of them Ozark Trail, like 2-man tents, right? Dome tent.
Something outside was pushing against the tent with enough force to crack one of its poles before crashing through the surrounding trees with a roar that sounded like a vehicle tearing through the woods.
And then it runs through the woods, and it would sound like if you were to just drive a vehicle, no road, just drive off into the woods, you know, just tore through there.
It wasn't the first warning that night. Earlier that evening in November 2011, heavy rhythmic breathing had drifted from just beyond the reach of their campfire light. When they finally looked into the darkness, they saw a massive, lanky figure standing just beyond the edge of the fire's glow.
Just at the edge of the firelight, just as far as it can shine, which makes me wonder, why are they scared of the light? Like, maybe they don't understand it, but it just stood right at the edge of the light, just as far as that would go. So maybe 10 yards, right? And there it is. It's standing there. It looks at us for, you know, what seemed like forever, probably wasn't long. And then it just turns around and walks off.
The creature appeared to have a rounded head with distinctly human-like features, including a broad, flat nose and dark, horse-like eyes reflecting the firelight. Even though the witness was carrying a .44 Magnum, he was overwhelmed by a feeling he had never experienced before. The realization that he had no control over what was unfolding around him.
And that feeling of helplessness. I don't like that. None of us really are ever in a situation, you know, hopefully, to where you don't have a say in the outcome. And when you're looking at something that massive, you're thinking it's a monster. I mean, I'm immediately thinking it's a Bigfoot because we're there, because it's a Bigfoot place, right?
That encounter, later recounted by Stacy Brown, became the beginning of a years-long search for answers. In 2012, he and his father traveled to Torreya State Park, hoping to document whatever had haunted him since that night. Equipped with a thermal camera and a Sony Nightshot camcorder, they ventured into the ravines beneath a light drizzle. The deeper they went, the stranger the woods became. Loud knocks and deep grunts echoed through the trees before developing into a deliberate rhythmic exchange.
We're playing music. We're cooking some ribs. We're just hanging out, having a good time, and we hear a knock, right? And so I tell my dad, yo, they're here. Now, it had been raining most of the day, but it wasn't a rain like it was just pouring. It was kind of a slight drizzle, almost like if you were in Seattle, right? And it just kind of slightly drizzles all day.
Following what appeared to be a game trail, they suddenly heard something large rushing across a nearby ridge, prompting Brown's father, a former Army Ranger, to urgently tell him to get his firearm ready. Moments later, the thermal camera, recording in black heat mode, captured a distinct heat signature moving rapidly across the gap before what they believed was the same presence continued following them all the way back to the edge of the park. The expedition eventually produced what became known as the Brown thermal footage, later examined by investigators including Cliff Barackman. But for Stacy Brown, the footage was never the most important part. What stayed with him was the overwhelming fear he experienced, from the moment something pushed against his tent to the feeling that whatever they encountered in the ravines had followed them through the forest. Those memories remain with him as a reminder that some mysteries in the North American wilderness still have no clear explanation. So what do you think Stacy Brown and his father encountered in those Florida ravines? The smell hits him first, thick, foul, and unmistakably wrong. Paul Freeman, a Forest Service ranger stationed near Walla Walla, Washington, is following a herd of elk on June 10, 1982, when he notices something unusual about their behavior. He steps out of his truck and begins tracking them on foot. That's when the odor stops him cold. Nothing in more than 20 years of working in the wilderness has ever smelled like this. He rounds a bend in the logging spur road, and the 10-foot bank beside him is suddenly no longer empty. Something steps down in a single stride, landing squarely in the middle of the road. Freeman's first thought is that he's looking at some kind of prehistoric man until he notices the face. It isn't quite human. It looks far more ape than man.
His first encounter was June 10th, 1982. He was following a herd of elk. He noticed some strange activity, so he got out of his truck to follow them on foot when he started to smell something that just wasn't normal. He started around a little corner in that logging spur road, and here come, in his own words, this critter that stepped down off this 10-foot bank with one step into the middle of the road. He did not know what it was. He did know immediately that it was not a bear.
The creature turns and locks eyes with him. For a moment, neither of them moves. Freeman can hear it breathing. He watches its chest rise and fall, muscles shifting beneath thick, matted hair. Then, without a sound, the creature turns and walks away, glancing back twice before disappearing into the trees.
His first thought was every picture that he had ever seen of prehistoric man, except that it was more ape-like in the face. It looked at him about the same time that he looked at it, and he said that it kind of stopped and he could hear it breathing. He was close enough, and he could see the stomach muscles in its chest moving as it was breathing. And then it started to walk off, stopping a couple times to look back at him before leaving the area.
Most people would have left it at that. Paul Freeman didn't. Instead, the encounter became the beginning of a 15-year search. On his own time, he returned to the same area again and again, hiking in before sunrise, hoping to find fresh tracks before whatever left them moved on. His attention eventually centered on Bear Spring, one of the few dependable water sources in the region. Almost every visit rewarded him with fresh footprints. Somehow, they always seemed to appear just before he arrived, as though whatever was leaving them knew exactly when he would be there.
It set off a 15-year obsession where literally all he wanted to do was prove to people that they existed and that he was not crazy. Deduck Spring is one of the large viable water sources that continues to function all year. Lots of wild game use it, the deer use it, elk, everything. And my dad had been finding evidence of them. He was finding footprints. He would go in the morning before the sun came up when he got off work, because he worked night shift at the time. And he thought they were coming earlier than he was, and he was missing them.
Then, everything changed. On August 20th, 1992, after finishing his night shift, Freeman left work early and decided to make one more stop at Bear Spring before heading home. The sun had barely begun to rise when he found another fresh line of footprints waiting beside the water. Grabbing his video camera, he believed he was finally about to document the evidence he had spent more than a decade searching for. But he had one thing wrong. This time, he wasn't the first one there. Whatever left the tracks hadn't gone anywhere. It was still nearby, watching and waiting for him to leave.
August 20th, 1992. He starts to drive home, and then he thinks, well, why not? I'll go up there. Maybe there's fresh footprints. Maybe I can get some nice casts. It's later than usual. And the first thing he notices are these footprints right there by the water. And so he gets his video camera out to start filming those prints. And he walked right upon one. Him thinking that they were there earlier than he was not entirely correct. They were watching him, and they were waiting for him to leave.
The footage Freeman recorded that morning, later shared by his son, Michael, and examined by researchers and Bigfoot communities across the country, appears to show something moving just beyond the edge of the frame, visible for only a brief moment before disappearing once again. Michael never forgot the way his father came home that day. He wasn't excited. He wasn't eager to show anyone the footage. He was shaken. According to Michael, it was the only time in his life he had ever seen his father truly frightened.
I remember coming upstairs, and here's my dad standing there, and he's shaking. I always tell people that that's the only time in my entire life that I ever saw my dad scared of anything. And I was with my dad when he died. That's the only proof I'll ever need for the existence of Bigfoot, because I saw it on his face and I saw it in his eyes, and I know they're real. I think it would be great if he was still alive to see the popularity of the Bigfoot culture and its acceptance in the world that we have today.
Paul Freeman spent 15 years trying to convince people he wasn't imagining what he had seen. He never lived to watch Bigfoot become a subject debated by millions, but according to his son, he never needed that validation. He had already come face to face with something he couldn't explain, and that was enough. The forest was alive, until it suddenly went silent. Everyone there heard it. Whatever was hiding beyond the trees didn't just watch, it responded. What started as a routine field investigation quickly turned into one of the most unsettling nights ever documented in the Kanawha State Forest, where a series of unexplained events unfolded one after another. During a workshop held in a secluded shelter area of the Kanawha State Forest, researchers and guests deliberately created noise to see if something hidden in the wilderness would react. Their attention remained fixed on a large tree with a distinctive hollow root system beside a creek, believing it could be an ideal hiding place for whatever might be watching. Then, it happened. Without warning, a massive rock came flying out of the dense brush, striking the ground with a heavy thud before rolling to a stop. The entire group fell silent, stunned by what they had just witnessed.
Yeah, it was the 5 of us. We were up there, and a large rock, fairly large rock, was thrown in our direction. Not at us, but in our direction. It made an extremely loud thud and roll, and
Seconds later, the forest erupted. A huge dead tree crashed to the ground, snapping branches and echoing through the hollow with explosive cracks, as if something enormous had forced it down. The atmosphere changed instantly. Thermal cameras were raised toward the dark tree line as the investigators searched for whatever had triggered the violent disturbance. The encounter was later featured by Small Town Monsters during their Investigation Bigfoot series, where researchers Heather and Courtney joined Ron Lanham and Joe Perdue of Wild and Weird, West Virginia, to investigate the strange activity reported throughout the forest. But the night wasn't over. A deep, low-frequency growl suddenly echoed through the darkness, vibrating across the woods and freezing everyone in place. Moments later, a team member stationed near the base camp reported hearing heavy, rhythmic footsteps splashing through the nearby creek, each step sounding closer than the last. Investigators rushed toward the source, but whatever had made the sounds was already gone. All it left behind were fresh, 3-toed footprints pressed into the wet mud, a silent piece of evidence with no obvious explanation.
we cast those, or we didn't get to cast those. We cast one that we found up the hollow there. We had already burned through all the casting material because we did a track casting workshop, so everybody had burned through it. We didn't have any plaster left at that point.
Determined to find more answers, the team later returned to the same location, focusing on runoff areas where the soft, saturated ground could preserve fresh tracks. There, they documented another consistent pattern of 3-toed footprints, unlike those of any known local wildlife, adding another layer to the mystery surrounding these woods.
Made a little spot right here underneath.
Yeah, I see it.
All those little spheres that are made.
But a lot of people kind of ignore this because they think, foot traffic, people automatically, but no, sometimes it's not. And it's just as, valuable to look in this kind of an area that it is out there. As a matter of fact, if there's something in this area, it's going to be a whole lot easier to rule in.
If something powerful enough to throw rocks, knock down trees, and disappear without a trace left behind footprints that don't match any known animal, what do you think was really hiding in the Kanawha State Forest? One wrong step, and the camera captured something that still divides the world decades later. Hidden deep within Oregon's Blue Mountains, a lone cameraman recorded a towering figure moving through the wilderness with a confidence that no known animal or human should possess. Some call it one of the greatest hoaxes ever filmed. Others believe it's the closest humanity has ever come to documenting the impossible. Judge for yourself. The environment is characterized by thick brush and scattered timber, providing excellent cover for anything trying to remain hidden. The camera remains fixed on the tree line, where subtle movement reveals what appears to be a massive bipedal figure weaving through the dense foliage. Every shake of the camera reflects the cameraman's struggle to keep the mysterious subject in view across the rugged terrain. The footage, later made famous by Paul Freeman and featured by researchers across the Bigfoot community, remains one of the most debated pieces of cryptid evidence ever recorded. The subject moves with a distinct, fluid gait that appears inconsistent with normal human movement. At various moments, it pauses behind thick brush, revealing brief glimpses of a dark, hair-covered body before disappearing again. As it advances, branches are pushed aside and its weight shifts naturally through the terrain. Heavy footsteps and the snapping of dry timber break the silence, emphasizing both the creature's size and how close it is to the cameraman. The encounter reaches its most dramatic moment as the figure briefly steps into a more open clearing, offering the clearest profile of its massive frame.
Jesus. Get up here where I can see me real quick. Get up here. Get a better picture. I wonder where the doggone thing went. It crossed right up there. Yeah. I just wonder. It should be right here somewhere. Oh God. There's two of them, I guess.
The figure maintains a calm, deliberate, rhythmic stride before disappearing once again into the deep shadows of the forest. The raw footage ends with Freeman desperately trying to relocate the subject, capturing the lingering tension of a face-to-face encounter with something that remains officially unclassified. If this footage is genuine, what do you think was really walking through the Blue Mountains that day? If you think these encounters are disturbing, the next one is different. So do you think Paul Freeman really encountered something science still can't explain? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.